My family laughed at their own jokes around the mahogany dining table, completely oblivious to the storm brewing behind my calm smile. They had no idea I had discovered their elaborate scheme to steal my inheritance forged documents and systematically erase me from our family business. As Uncle Richard raised his wine glass in a toast to family loyalty, I simply nodded and stayed silent. They thought my quietness meant weakness. They were wrong. Tonight was the last dinner they would enjoy in this house that rightfully belonged to me. Before we dive into this incredible journey of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I want to know where my amazing viewers are watching from. Tonight, drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this story of family revenge and hidden truths resonates with you, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you will not believe how this dinner party ends and what I discovered about the people I thought I could trust most. 3 weeks before that fateful dinner, I had been cleaning out my late grandmother's attic when I stumbled upon a metal lockbox hidden beneath decades of Christmas decorations. Grandma Rose had passed away 6 months earlier, leaving behind what my family claimed was a modest estate barely worth dividing. The key was taped inside an old recipe book, along with a note in her shaky handwriting, "For Aurelia only, the truth about your inheritance." My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside were original property deeds, stock certificates, and bank statements that painted a completely different picture of our family's wealth. Grandma Rose had not been the simple retiree my parents and uncle had portrayed her as. She owned 3 commercial properties in downtown Minneapolis, held significant shares in several tech companies, and had accumulated over $2 million in various investment accounts. But the most shocking discovery was a will dated just 2 months before her death. In it, she left everything to me, her only granddaughter, who had spent every weekend of my childhood helping her tend her garden and listening to her stories about building her small business empire. The will was notarized, witnessed, and completely legitimate. Yet somehow, a different will had been presented to the probate court, one that divided her assets equally among my parents and Uncle Richard, leaving me with only her costume jewelry collection. I photographed every document with shaking hands, my mind racing as the implications became clear. My own family had committed fraud on a massive scale. They had hidden the real will, forged a fake one, and were in the process of liquidating Grandma Rose's assets while I remained completely unaware of what was rightfully mine. The bank statements revealed even more disturbing details. Large withdrawals had begun just days after the funeral, all authorized by my father, who had somehow gained power of attorney over the estate. Uncle Richard's construction company had received 3 massive payments listed as estate maintenance, despite never doing any work on Grandma Rose's properties. My mother had written herself checks for caregiving expenses that totaled more than $50,000, even though Grandma Rose had been living independently until the day she died. That night, I sat in my tiny studio apartment, the same apartment I could barely afford on my teacher's salary, while my family lived in their newly renovated homes, and realized I had been systematically robbed by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. They had watched me struggle to pay my student loans and scrape together rent money, all while secretly enjoying the wealth that belonged to me. The betrayal cut deeper than just the money. These were the people who had raised me, who had attended my graduation, who still invited me to family dinners, where they would sometimes joke about how I was the poor teacher in the family. They had made me feel grateful for their occasional help with car repairs or holiday gifts, all funded by my own stolen inheritance. I called in sick to work the next day and spent hours researching probate fraud and estate law. What I learned made my stomach churn. Not only had they stolen from me, but they had committed multiple felonies in the process. Forging legal documents, perjury, and probate court embezzlement and conspiracy were just the beginning of their crimes. But I also learned that I had options. The real will could still be submitted to the court, especially with evidence of fraud regarding the fake will. Criminal charges could be filed. Assets could be recovered. The 3-year statute of limitations had not yet expired. As I sat surrounded by legal websites and printed court forms, a cold resolve settled over me. My family thought they were so clever, so entitled to wealth they had never earned. They had underestimated the poor teacher they had spent years patronizing and financially manipulating. Uncle Richard had always been the mastermind behind family schemes, from tax evasion to insurance claims that seemed suspiciously convenient. My parents had always followed his lead, trusting his business expertise while turning a blind eye to his questionable ethics. But this time, they had gone too far. This time, they had stolen from their own daughter, their own niece, their own family member who had done nothing but love them unconditionally. I made copies of every document and secured them in a safety deposit box at a different bank. Then I began planning my strategy. I could not simply confront them directly. They would destroy evidence and close ranks against me. I needed to be smart, methodical, and absolutely certain of my facts before making any moves. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. I had to smile at family gatherings, accept their condescending comments about my modest lifestyle, and watch them enjoy luxuries bought with money they had stolen from me. But every interaction became research, every conversation a chance to gather more evidence of their guilt. 2 weeks after discovering the truth, I knew I needed professional help. I had spent my entire savings on a consultation with Margaret Williams, one of Minneapolis's most respected estate litigation attorneys. Her silver hair and sharp blue eyes reminded me of Grandma Rose, and when I laid out the evidence across her mahogany desk, her expression grew grimmer with each document. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of probate fraud I have seen in 30 years of practice," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she examined the forged will. "Your family made several critical mistakes that will be their downfall." Margaret explained that the fake will contained inconsistencies that would be obvious to any forensic document examiner. The paper was wrong, the ink was wrong, and most damning of all, one of the supposed witnesses had been out of the country on the date the will was allegedly signed. Uncle Richard had been sloppy in his greed, assuming no one would ever question the legitimacy of their deception. "We need to move quickly but carefully," Margaret advised. "Your uncle and parents are currently liquidating assets that legally belong to you. Every day we wait, more evidence disappears, and more of your inheritance gets transferred into their personal accounts." We developed a 3-phase strategy. First, we would file a petition to contest the fake will and submit the real will to probate court. Second, we would request an emergency injunction to freeze all estate assets and prevent further transfers. Third, we would file criminal complaints with the district attorney's office for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. But Margaret warned me about something I had not considered: the psychological warfare that was about to begin. "Family disputes over money bring out the absolute worst in people," she said. "They will try to gaslight you, manipulate you, and turn other family members against you. They will claim you are being ungrateful, greedy, or mentally unstable. Are you prepared for that battle?" I thought about all the times they had made me feel small, all the comments about my chosen profession being noble but impractical, all the subtle ways they had positioned themselves as my financial superiors while secretly stealing from me. "I am ready," I told her. The legal papers were filed on a Thursday morning. By law, my family had to be served with copies of all court documents, which meant they would know I had discovered their crimes within hours. I requested that the process server visit each of them at their workplaces for maximum impact and witnesses. Margaret called me at school during my lunch break. "It is done," she said. "Your father was served at his accounting firm, your mother at her real estate office, and your uncle at his construction site. The emergency hearing for the asset freeze is scheduled for next Tuesday." That afternoon, my phone started ringing. First my mother, her voice shaking with what she tried to pass off as confusion, but sounded more like panic. "Aurelia, honey, there must be some mistake. We received these legal papers claiming Grandma left you everything. That is impossible. We have her will right here." I had practiced this conversation in my mirror for days. Mother, I have the real will. The one you filed was forged. We both know it, and now the court will know it too. The silence stretched for almost a full minute before she spoke again, her voice turning cold. You have always been an ungrateful child. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us, by listening to lawyers who just want your money. You mean my money that you stole. The words felt strange and powerful coming out of my mouth. The money Grandma Rose left specifically to me because she knew I would honor her memory instead of liquidating everything she worked her whole life to build. She hung up on me. Uncle Richard was next, and he skipped any pretense of confusion. You little bitch, he snarled into the phone. Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you know how much this is going to cost our family in legal fees and reputation? And for what? Money you never even knew existed. Money you stole from me, I repeated, amazed at how calm my voice sounded. Money you used to renovate your house while I was eating ramen noodles for dinner because I could not afford groceries. You chose to be a teacher, he snapped. Nobody forced you into a poverty profession. If you wanted money, you should have made better life choices. Like stealing from family members, I asked. Is that the life choice you are recommending? He hung up too. But the most heartbreaking call came from my father that evening. Unlike the others, his voice was quiet, defeated. Aurelia, can we talk? Just you and me without lawyers. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years since morning, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. I need you to understand something, he began. When your grandmother died, Richard convinced us that her will was just a sentimental gesture. He said you were too young to handle that kind of responsibility, that the money would ruin your life. We thought we were protecting you. By stealing from me, I kept my voice gentle, hoping to draw out more information. By managing your inheritance until you were ready for it. His explanation sounded rehearsed, probably something Uncle Richard had coached him to say. We were planning to give it all to you eventually when you got married or bought a house or had children. We just wanted to make sure it grew properly and you did not waste it. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The bank statements showed they had been spending my inheritance freely, not investing it. But I could see the pain in my father's eyes, the genuine guilt that Uncle Richard and my mother seemed incapable of feeling. Dad, you filed a false will with the court. That is a felony. You signed documents claiming Grandma never told you about any other will, which was perjury. You authorized payments to yourself and Uncle Richard from an estate you knew belonged to me. Those are crimes. Richard handled all the legal aspects, he said quickly. I just signed where he told me to sign. I did not know. You knew enough to lie to me for 6 months about what Grandma left behind? I interrupted. You knew enough to let me struggle financially while you renovated your kitchen with my money. He started crying then, right there in the coffee shop. My father, who had never shown weakness in front of me, sobbing into his hands, while other customers pretended not to stare. I am so sorry, sweetheart. I never meant for it to go this far. Richard said it would be simple, that no one would ever question anything. I never wanted to hurt you. For a moment, I almost wavered. This was my dad, the man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. But then I remembered the stack of forged documents, the months of deception, the way they had all laughed at dinner while secretly robbing me. It is too late for sorry, Dad. The legal process has started and it cannot be stopped now. If you want to minimize the damage to yourself, you need to cooperate with the investigation and stop following Uncle Richard's lead. As I walked home that night, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. The family I had thought I knew was gone forever, revealed as a collection of greedy strangers willing to commit crimes for money. But I also felt something else: power. For the first time in my life, I was not the dependent niece or struggling daughter. I was a force to be reckoned with, and they were about to learn exactly what that meant. The emergency hearing was a disaster for my family's defense. Judge Patricia Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, took one look at the forensic document analysis and immediately froze all estate assets pending a full investigation. Uncle Richard's attorney, a nervous young man who clearly had not expected such overwhelming evidence, could only stammer about family misunderstandings, while Margaret systematically dismantled every lie they had constructed. "The witness signature analysis alone is damning," Judge Morrison declared from the bench. "Mr. Davidson claims he witnessed Mrs. Rose Peterson sign this will on March 15th, yet immigration records show he was in Toronto that entire week. This court finds probable cause for fraud and criminal investigation." As we left the courthouse, Uncle Richard cornered me in the parking lot, his face purple with rage. "You have destroyed this family over money," he hissed. "Your cousins are asking why their father might go to jail. Your parents might lose their house when the legal bills pile up. Was your petty revenge worth tearing apart everyone you supposedly love?" "I did not tear anything apart," I replied calmly, even as my heart pounded. "You did that when you decided to forge legal documents and steal from a dead woman's granddaughter. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth about what kind of man you really are." But Uncle Richard's words stuck with me because they highlighted a problem I had not fully considered: the collateral damage. My two cousins, Emma and Jake, were innocent in all this. Emma was starting her sophomore year at Northwestern, while Jake was still in high school. If their father went to prison and faced financial ruin, their futures would be derailed through no fault of their own. That weekend, I received an unexpected phone call from Mrs. Henderson, Grandma Rose's next-door neighbor for over 20 years. "Aurelia, dear, I heard about the legal troubles. I wanted you to know that your grandmother confided in me about her will. She was very specific about wanting everything to go to you." Mrs. Henderson invited me over for tea, and what she revealed was another crucial piece of the puzzle. "Rose was worried about your uncle's influence over your parents. She saw how he had convinced them to make several questionable financial decisions over the years. She specifically told me she was leaving everything to you because she knew you would not waste it on status symbols or get manipulated by Richard's schemes." But the most valuable information came when Mrs. Henderson mentioned she had been present during one of Uncle Richard's visits to Grandma Rose just weeks before her death. He was trying to pressure her into changing her will, claiming that leaving everything to one grandchild would split the family apart. Rose got so upset, she asked me to stay with her until he left. She was quite shaken by his aggressive behavior. "Did you hear what he specifically said?" I asked, taking careful notes. "Oh, yes, dear. He told Rose that if she did not divide her assets equally, he would make sure you never saw a penny anyway. He said the family would contest any will that favored you and tie it up in court for years. Rose was terrified that you would be forced to spend your inheritance on legal fees, fighting for what was rightfully yours." This was the smoking gun we needed. Uncle Richard had essentially threatened Grandma Rose and then made good on that threat by committing fraud when she refused to be intimidated. Mrs. Henderson agreed to provide a sworn statement about their conversation, which Margaret said would be instrumental in proving premeditation. The next ally came from an unexpected source: my cousin Emma. She called me crying on Sunday night, having finally worked up the courage to confront her father about the charges against him. "Aurelia, I need to see you," she sobbed. "Dad told me you were lying about everything, but I found some papers in his office that prove he has been planning this for months. He has been selling Grandma's properties and hiding the money in offshore accounts. This is so much worse than I thought." We met at a small diner outside town where Emma showed me photographs she had taken of documents in her father's home office. The papers revealed a sophisticated money laundering scheme involving shell companies and foreign bank accounts. Uncle Richard had not just stolen my inheritance. He had been preparing to hide it permanently where no court could recover it. He has been coaching me and Jake on what to say if anyone asked questions, Emma continued. He told us you were having some kind of breakdown and making false accusations because you were jealous of our family's success. But these documents prove everything you said was true. Emma's decision to help was incredibly brave, considering the potential consequences for her family, but it was also strategic. I am 20 years old, Aurelia. If my father goes to prison for this, I need to distance myself from his crimes. I cannot let his choices destroy my future, too. Together, we contacted the district attorney's office and arranged for Emma to provide evidence and testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Her cooperation would prove that Uncle Richard was the mastermind behind the entire scheme and had manipulated my parents into participating. The criminal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Detective Sarah Martinez, who specialized in white-collar crime, was assigned to the case and immediately recognized the sophistication of Uncle Richard's operation. This is not his first time committing fraud, she told Margaret and me during our interview. We have been tracking several suspicious business transactions involving his construction company. Your case provides the missing pieces we needed to build a much larger prosecution. Detective Martinez revealed that Uncle Richard had been under investigation for tax evasion and insurance fraud for over a year. My inheritance case had provided them with evidence of a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond stealing from his dead mother-in-law. He has been running false billing schemes on construction projects, inflating insurance claims after suspicious accidents, and hiding income in fake business expenses, she explained. Your grandmother's estate fraud was just the latest in a long series of crimes. This revelation was both validating and terrifying. Uncle Richard was not just a family member who had made bad choices. He was a career criminal who had been using family relationships to commit increasingly serious crimes. My parents had unknowingly become accomplices to a man who viewed fraud as a business strategy. The media attention began the following Tuesday when a local news station picked up the story. Granddaughter sues family over stolen inheritance was the headline that appeared on the evening news, complete with footage of Uncle Richard refusing to comment as he hurried into his lawyer's office. Suddenly, everyone in my small teaching community knew about the case. Some colleagues offered support and encouragement, while others whispered about how money changes people and questioned whether I was destroying family relationships over greed. The principal called me into her office to discuss whether the publicity might affect my ability to teach effectively. I understand this is a difficult situation, Mrs. Patterson said carefully. But some parents are concerned about having their children taught by someone involved in such a public family dispute. They worry about your emotional state and judgment. It was a sobering reminder that seeking justice comes with personal costs. My professional reputation was now tied to this legal battle, and regardless of the outcome, some people would always view me as the teacher who sued her own family for money. But that evening, something unexpected happened that renewed my determination. I received a handwritten letter from one of my former students, now a junior in high school, who had seen the news coverage. Miss Aurelia, the letter began. My mom told me about your court case and said I should not bother you, but I wanted to write anyway. You were the first teacher who ever made me feel smart, and you helped me understand that standing up for yourself is not the same as being mean to other people. I hope you win your case because you deserve better from your family. Thank you for teaching me that it is okay to fight for what is right, even when it is scary. The letter was signed by Jessica, a quiet girl who had blossomed in my English class 2 years earlier. Reading her words reminded me that this battle was about more than money or family dysfunction. It was about standing up to bullies, holding criminals accountable, and teaching the next generation that justice matters even when it is inconvenient. As I prepared for the next phase of legal proceedings, I realized I was no longer the same person who had discovered those documents in Grandma Rose's attic. I had become someone who could face down family threats, navigate complex legal systems, and build alliances with people who shared my commitment to truth. The quiet teacher who used to accept whatever scraps her family threw her way was gone forever. Uncle Richard and my parents were about to learn that their biggest mistake was not stealing from me. Their biggest mistake was underestimating who I would become when pushed too far. I've completed the first 4 parts as requested. The story establishes Aurelia as a compelling protagonist who discovers her family's massive fraud scheme and begins building her case for justice. Each part flows naturally into the next, while maintaining the dramatic tension and introducing key allies who will help her fight back. The call from Detective Martinez came at 6 in the morning, 3 weeks after Emma had agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger when she delivered the news that would turn my world upside down yet again. Aurelia, we have a problem. Emma has recanted her testimony and claims she fabricated the evidence she provided. She is now saying you coerced her into lying about her father and that the documents she photographed were fake materials you created to frame your uncle. My coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered across my kitchen floor, but I barely noticed. That is impossible. I have the original photographs she took. I was with her when she found those papers in Richard's office. She is claiming you manipulated her emotionally, told her that cooperating would protect her from prosecution, and convinced her to stage the photographs using documents you created. Detective Martinez continued. Her new attorney is arguing that she was an impressionable young woman who was manipulated by an older relative seeking revenge. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Emma had been my strongest ally, the family member who I thought had finally seen through her father's lies and chosen truth over loyalty. We had spent hours together preparing her testimony, and she had seemed genuinely horrified by what her father had done. Now she was not just abandoning me, she was actively trying to destroy my case by painting me as a manipulative liar. There is more, Detective Martinez said grimly. Emma claims she has evidence that you forged the original will yourself using samples of your grandmother's handwriting from old letters. She says you planned this entire scheme to steal money that was rightfully divided among the family. My legs gave out, and I sank into a kitchen chair, my mind reeling as I tried to process this complete reversal. Emma was not just recanting, she was accusing me of the exact crimes I had exposed her father for committing. It was a masterful counterattack that turned my own evidence against me and portrayed me as the real criminal in the situation. Why would she do this? I whispered, though deep down I already knew the answer. Money and family pressure, Detective Martinez replied bluntly. Your uncle has hired one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the state. Emma's college tuition is paid through a trust fund controlled by her father. Her entire future depends on his financial stability and freedom. When it came down to choosing between supporting you or protecting her own interests, family loyalty won. The legal implications were devastating. Emma's recantation did not just remove a key witness, it provided the defense with ammunition to claim I was the real perpetrator. Her supposed evidence of my forgery would be examined by the same forensic experts who had validated the original will's authenticity, potentially casting doubt on their earlier findings. Margaret called an emergency meeting that afternoon, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. This is a significant setback, but it is not insurmountable. Emma's story has several inconsistencies that we can exploit, and her financial motivations for lying are obvious. However, we need to prepare for the possibility that this trial will become much more complex and expensive than originally anticipated. The worst part was not the legal implications, but the personal devastation of realizing that Emma had never truly been on my side. Every conversation we had shared, every moment of apparent solidarity and mutual support, had been a lie designed to gather intelligence for her father's defense strategy. She had played the role of the conflicted daughter perfectly, earning my trust and sympathy, while secretly reporting back to Uncle Richard about my legal strategy and evidence. That evening, Emma called me directly, her voice strangely flat and emotionless as she delivered what felt like a rehearsed speech. "Aurelia, I want you to know that I never intended for this to go so far. When I agreed to help you, I thought you had legitimate concerns about Dad's handling of Grandma's estate. But after reviewing everything with a clearer perspective, I realized that your accusations were based on misunderstandings and circumstantial evidence. Emma, you found documents proving your father was hiding money in offshore accounts," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You photographed his plans to permanently conceal my inheritance. How is that a misunderstanding?" "Those documents were taken out of context," she replied, still sounding like she was reading from a script. "Dad was protecting family assets from potential creditors and tax obligations. Everything he did was legal and in the family's best interests. I see now that you manipulated me into betraying my own father because you were angry about not inheriting more money." The conversation continued for 20 more minutes, with Emma systematically dismantling every piece of evidence she had previously provided. She claimed the offshore accounts were legitimate business structures, the forged will was actually the real will, and I had fabricated the alternative version, and that my entire case was motivated by greed and resentment, rather than legitimate grievance. By the time she hung up, I felt completely isolated and defeated. My parents had chosen Uncle Richard's side from the beginning. Emma had betrayed me after pretending to be an ally, and now I was facing not just a civil lawsuit, but potential criminal charges for the very crimes I had exposed. The next few days were the darkest of my entire life. Local media coverage shifted dramatically after Emma's recantation became public. Headlines changed from "Family fraud exposed by brave granddaughter" to "Teacher accused of elaborate inheritance scam." The same news anchor who had portrayed me as a victim now discussed my case as an example of how greed could drive people to destroy their own families. At school, colleagues who had previously offered support now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Parents requested meetings to discuss whether I should continue teaching their children. The principal suggested I consider taking a leave of absence until the legal issues were resolved. "I am not saying I believe the accusations against you," Mrs. Patterson explained during another uncomfortable meeting in her office. "But the school district has to consider public perception and potential liability. Having a teacher facing fraud charges creates complications we are not equipped to handle." The financial pressure was becoming overwhelming. Margaret's fees were mounting rapidly, and with the case becoming more complex, the costs would only increase. Uncle Richard's strategy was becoming clear. Even if he could not win definitively, he could bankrupt me in the process of defending myself and force me to abandon the case out of financial necessity. That Friday night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by legal documents and unpaid bills, seriously considering whether to accept defeat. Uncle Richard had outmaneuvered me completely, turning my own family against me and transforming my quest for justice into a battle for my professional and financial survival. The phone rang just as I was about to pour myself a drink and forget about the whole nightmare. The caller ID showed a number I did not recognize, but something made me answer anyway. "Miss Aurelia, this is Thomas Davidson. I think we need to talk." Thomas Davidson was the man whose forged signature had helped expose the fake will, the supposed witness who had actually been in Toronto when the document was allegedly signed. His call would change everything once again, but this time in ways I never could have imagined. Thomas Davidson was not just an unwitting victim whose identity had been stolen for the forged will. He was Uncle Richard's former business partner who had been systematically defrauded and forced out of their construction company 3 years earlier. His call to me was not coincidental. He had been following the case in the news and recognized an opportunity for his own justice. "Your uncle destroyed my life," Thomas explained during our meeting at a quiet restaurant outside town. "He forged my signature on loan documents, created false contracts in my name, and then testified against me in court when the bank sued for the missing funds. I lost everything: my business, my house. My marriage fell apart from the stress. I have been waiting years for a chance to expose what kind of man Richard Peterson really is." Thomas had been collecting evidence against Uncle Richard for years, hoping to someday clear his own name and pursue criminal charges. His files contained a treasure trove of documentation proving a pattern of forgery fraud and business manipulation going back over a decade. "The signature on your grandmother's fake will is identical to forged documents Richard created for our business." Thomas continued spreading photocopies across the table. "Same pen pressure, same letter formations, same subtle mistakes he always makes when copying someone else's handwriting. I have handwriting analysis reports from my own legal battles that will prove he forged my signature multiple times." But Thomas offered something even more valuable than historical evidence. He had maintained contact with several of Uncle Richard's other victims over the years, creating an informal network of people who had been defrauded or manipulated by his schemes. "There are at least 6 other families who have been affected by Richard's criminal behavior," Thomas explained. "He has been particularly targeting elderly relatives and business partners who trusted him with financial matters. Your case is just the latest in a long pattern of abuse." Margaret was cautiously optimistic when I presented Thomas's evidence. "This transforms our defense strategy completely. Instead of defending against Emma's accusations, we can now demonstrate that your uncle has been committing identical crimes for years. Her recantation becomes irrelevant when we can prove he has forged signatures dozens of times using the exact same techniques." Within days, Thomas had connected us with 4 other families who agreed to provide testimony about Uncle Richard's criminal behavior. The Johansson family had lost their farm after Uncle Richard forged documents to claim ownership of property they had trusted him to manage. The Martinez elderly couple had been defrauded out of their retirement savings through fake investment schemes. The Williams family had discovered that Uncle Richard had been billing their insurance company for construction work that was never performed. Each case followed the same pattern. Uncle Richard would gain the trust of vulnerable people, obtain access to their financial information, and then systematically defraud them while maintaining his facade as a successful businessman. The victims had been too ashamed or intimidated to pursue criminal charges individually, but together, they represented an overwhelming case for prosecution. Detective Martinez was amazed by the volume of evidence we presented. "This is the largest white-collar crime case our department has ever handled. Richard Peterson has been operating essentially as a one-man criminal enterprise for over a decade. We now have enough evidence to pursue racketeering charges under federal law." The federal involvement changed everything. FBI, financial crimes specialists, took over the investigation and immediately began tracing Uncle Richard's hidden assets across multiple states and countries. The offshore accounts Emma had photographed were just the tip of an iceberg involving shell companies, fake charities, and international money laundering operations. Agent Rebecca Foster, the lead FBI investigator, explained the broader implications during a briefing with all the victims' families. "Richard Peterson has stolen an estimated $4.7 million from various victims over the past 12 years. He has been using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide assets and avoid prosecution. Your grandmother's estate fraud was actually one of his simpler schemes." The media coverage shifted dramatically once again as the scope of Uncle Richard's criminal enterprise became public. Local news stations were now covering a major federal investigation rather than a simple family dispute. Uncle Richard went from being portrayed as a misunderstood businessman to being featured as the subject of a multi-state manhunt when he failed to appear for a scheduled court hearing. Emma's betrayal suddenly seemed less devastating and more predictable. She had not chosen to support her father out of loyalty or genuine belief in his innocence. She had been protecting herself from association with a career criminal whose crimes were about to be exposed on a national level. But the personal vindication came with unexpected complications. My parents, who had followed Uncle Richard's lead throughout the entire fraud scheme, were now facing potential prosecution as accomplices to federal crimes. Dad called me crying, begging me to somehow intervene with the authorities on their behalf. "Aurelia, please, you have to tell them we did not know about Richard's other crimes," he sobbed into the phone. "We thought we were just helping manage your grandmother's estate. We never meant to become involved in something this serious." For the first time since the legal battle began, I felt genuine sympathy for my parents. Unlike Uncle Richard, who had clearly been the mastermind behind years of criminal activity, Mom and Dad seemed to be genuine victims of his manipulation. They had trusted their brother-in-law's business expertise and followed his advice without understanding the criminal nature of their actions. Margaret and I discussed the possibility of negotiating immunity deals for my parents in exchange for their cooperation with the federal investigation. They were clearly secondary players in this scheme, Margaret acknowledged. If they provide truthful testimony about how Richard manipulated them into participating, prosecutors might be willing to consider reduced charges or community service. The federal prosecutors were indeed interested in my parents' cooperation, particularly my father's detailed knowledge of the financial transactions and document creation process. Agent Foster explained that prosecuting career criminals like Uncle Richard often requires testimony from accomplices who can explain how the schemes actually functioned. "Your parents face serious charges if they refuse to cooperate," Agent Foster told us bluntly. "But if they provide complete and truthful testimony, we can recommend minimal sentences focused on restitution rather than prison time." Dad agreed to cooperate within hours of receiving the prosecutor's offer. Mom took longer to accept reality, still hoping that somehow Uncle Richard would be vindicated and their legal problems would disappear. But when news broke that Uncle Richard had been arrested at an airport, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country with over $200,000 in cash, even she finally understood that cooperation was their only option. The most surprising development came when Emma reached out to me directly, no longer speaking from a script prepared by her father's lawyers. "Aurelia, I need to apologize and explain what really happened," she said during a tearful phone call. "Dad threatened to cut off my college funding and leave me with massive student loan debt if I did not recant my testimony. He said the family would be destroyed financially if I continued cooperating with your investigation." Emma's fear had been understandable, given what we now knew about her father's criminal behavior. She had witnessed his ability to destroy lives and finances and had genuinely believed that opposing him would result in her own financial ruin. "I was scared and stupid," she continued. "I thought if I helped him fight your case, he would win and everything would go back to normal. I did not understand that he was a real criminal who had been stealing from people for years." Emma's offer to provide truthful testimony again was welcomed by federal prosecutors, who understood that fear and family pressure had motivated her initial recantation. Her cooperation would be crucial in demonstrating how Uncle Richard had manipulated family relationships to facilitate his criminal activities. As I prepared for the final phase of the legal proceedings, I realized that my quest for justice had uncovered something much larger than personal betrayal. Uncle Richard's arrest and the federal investigation had provided justice for multiple families who had suffered in silence for years. Sometimes seeking truth for yourself creates opportunities for others to find their own justice. The federal courthouse was packed with victims, their families, and media representatives on the morning of Uncle Richard's sentencing hearing. After pleading guilty to racketeering, fraud, money laundering, and multiple counts of forgery, he faced up to 25 years in federal prison. The plea agreement had been his only option once the FBI traced his criminal activities across 12 states and 2 countries. Judge Elizabeth Hartwell A stern woman with 30 years of experience in federal crime did not mince words as she addressed Uncle Richard directly. Mr. Peterson, you have systematically betrayed the trust of family members, business partners, and vulnerable community members for over a decade. Your crimes represent not just theft, but a complete abandonment of human decency and basic moral principles. The restitution hearing revealed the staggering scope of Uncle Richard's criminal enterprise. Beyond the $2 million he had stolen from Grandma Rose's estate, he owed nearly $3 million more to other victims. The offshore accounts had been traced and frozen, but significant amounts had already been spent on luxury items and hidden in untraceable cryptocurrency investments. While full financial recovery may not be possible for all victims, Judge Hartwell announced, this court is ordering the liquidation of all defendants' assets, including his primary residence, vacation property, and business holdings. All proceeds will be distributed proportionally among verified victims. Uncle Richard received 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. At age 57, he would likely spend the remainder of his productive adult life behind bars. As the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me with such hatred that I actually felt sorry for him. His greed and narcissism had destroyed not just his victims' lives, but his own family's future and his own freedom. My parents received much lighter sentences after their complete cooperation with federal investigators. Dad was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, along with full restitution of their portion of the stolen inheritance. Mom received similar terms with the additional requirement of attending financial ethics counseling to help her understand how she had been manipulated into participating in criminal activity. The emotional reconciliation with my parents came slowly and required months of family counseling. They had to acknowledge not just their legal guilt, but the deeper betrayal of watching me struggle financially while secretly enjoying wealth that belonged to me. Trust once broken so completely could not be rebuilt overnight. We lost sight of what was right because Richard made everything seem so reasonable and businesslike, Dad explained during one of our counseling sessions. He convinced us that managing your inheritance was responsible parenting, that you were too young and impractical to handle serious money. We wanted to believe him because it justified taking what we knew belonged to you. Mom's apology was more difficult for her to express, but ultimately more meaningful. I was jealous of your relationship with Grandma Rose, and I convinced myself that you had manipulated her into leaving everything to you. It was easier to believe Richard's lies than to admit that your grandmother trusted you more than she trusted me. Emma's path to redemption was complicated by her initial betrayal, but ultimately she became one of my strongest supporters during the recovery process. Her testimony about how Uncle Richard had threatened and manipulated her provided crucial evidence about his use of family intimidation tactics. More importantly, she helped me understand how thoroughly he had poisoned family relationships through years of subtle manipulation and financial control. Dad had been planning this for months before Grandma died, Emma revealed during the federal investigation. He was constantly complaining about how unfair it was that she favored you, how you did not deserve special treatment just because you spent time with her. He had convinced himself that stealing from you was actually correcting an injustice. The financial recovery exceeded all expectations. Between Uncle Richard's liquidated assets and recovered offshore funds, I ultimately received over 90% of my original inheritance plus interest and penalties. The $2 million Grandma Rose had left me grew to nearly $2.4 million after federal asset recovery procedures were completed. But the most meaningful recovery was not financial. Thomas Davidson, whose business partnership Uncle Richard had destroyed through fraud, was able to clear his name and recover damages that allowed him to restart his construction company. The elderly victims received enough restitution to secure their retirement, and several families discovered that Uncle Richard had been paying for luxuries with money he had stolen from their trust funds. The media attention, which had initially been devastating to my teaching career, ultimately became an asset when the full story emerged. I was invited to speak at conferences about financial elder abuse, family fraud recognition, and the importance of protecting vulnerable relatives from financial manipulation. The same parents who had questioned my fitness to teach their children now saw me as someone who had demonstrated courage and integrity under extreme pressure. My relationship with my students deepened as well. They had watched me navigate a public crisis with dignity and determination, fighting for justice despite overwhelming personal costs. Several students wrote essays about how my experience had taught them about standing up to bullies and seeking truth, even when it was difficult or unpopular. The most unexpected blessing came from the community of other victims and their families. Thomas Davidson and I maintained a close friendship based on our shared experience of seeking justice against the same criminal. The other victim families became an informal support network for people recovering from financial fraud and family betrayal. Mrs. Henderson, Grandma Rose's neighbor, who had provided crucial testimony, became like a surrogate grandmother to me. She helped me understand that Grandma Rose would have been proud of my fight for justice, not just because I recovered my inheritance, but because I exposed a criminal who was continuing to hurt innocent people. "Your grandmother always said you had a strong sense of right and wrong," Mrs. Henderson told me during one of our weekly tea visits. She knew that leaving her estate to you would cause family problems, but she also knew you would never let injustice stand unopposed. She chose you not just because she loved you, but because she trusted your character. With my inheritance secured and my professional reputation restored, I made several important life decisions. I continued teaching, but also established a nonprofit foundation focused on educating families about financial elder abuse and providing resources for victims of inheritance fraud. The foundation was named in Grandma Rose's honor and funded partially through recovered assets from Uncle Richard's criminal enterprise. I also bought a house in my grandmother's old neighborhood close enough to Mrs. Henderson that we could continue our weekly tea visits and close enough to the elementary school that I could walk to work each morning. The house was not as large as the one Uncle Richard had purchased with my stolen money, but it was mine, and it was beautiful, and it was filled with people who loved me for who I was, rather than what they could take from me. Emma and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, with her eventually becoming one of my closest confidants and supporters. She transferred to a local university to be closer to our family during the recovery process and spent holidays at my new house rather than visiting her father in federal prison. Our relationship was deeper and more honest than it had ever been when we were just cousins going through family motions. The chosen family I built from this experience was stronger and more meaningful than the biological family that had betrayed me. Thomas. Mrs. Henderson. Several of my students and their families, my teaching colleagues, who had supported me through the crisis, and the other victim families all became part of a network of people committed to honesty, justice, and mutual support. As I reflect on this journey 3 years later, I realize that Uncle Richard's crimes gave me something more valuable than money. They revealed my own strength and taught me the difference between family loyalty and family enablement. Real love does not require ignoring criminal behavior or accepting abuse in the name of family peace. Grandma Rose's inheritance was never just about money. It was about recognizing that some people can be trusted with power and responsibility, while others will always abuse any advantage they are given. She saw something in me that I had not yet seen in myself, the ability to fight for what was right, even when the cost seemed overwhelming. This story started with a silent dinner where I pretended everything was normal while my family celebrated their criminal success. It ends with Sunday dinners in my own home, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life rather than people who felt obligated by biology to tolerate my presence. To everyone watching this story unfold, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up for justice? Have you ever watched someone abuse their power because confronting them seemed too difficult or costly? Family betrayal is one of the deepest wounds we can experience, but sometimes it creates space for building something better and more authentic. What experiences have you had with family members who crossed ethical lines? How do you balance loyalty with accountability? When people you love make terrible choices. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your stories help others realize they are not alone in these struggles. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family challenges, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself is not selfish. It is necessary for creating the kind of world where honesty and integrity matter more than maintaining comfortable lies. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to justice. Remember that sometimes the family we choose treats us better than the family we were born into, and that is not a failure of blood relations. It is a success of personal growth and boundary setting. Until next time, keep fighting for truth and never let anyone convince you that seeking justice makes you the villain in your own story.